The envelope sits innocently on Mike's kitchen table, his name written in Sarah's elegant script. 30 years of marriage taught him to recognize the weight of important letters. His coffee grows cold as his weathered fingers trace the sealed edge. When he finally opens it, the bank statement reveals withdrawals he never authorized, large sums transferred to Holt Collection. Mike's vision blurs, tears forming as he connects this discovery to Sarah's sudden need for space last week. A family photo watches from the wall, their anniversary dinner just months ago, her smile now seeming rehearsed. Has betrayal ever blindsided you when examining everyday paperwork? Share your experience below. Like if this moment resonates, follow to discover how Mike uncovers the truth. His hand trembles, coffee spilling slightly as 30 years of trust dissolve into suspicion. The grandfather clock ticks in the silence, marking seconds in a life suddenly unrecognizable. The envelope sat innocently on Mike's desk, Sarah's elegant handwriting addressing it to their joint account. 30 years of marriage had taught him to recognize the weight of important documents. His coffee cooled beside the lamp as his weathered fingers hesitated over the seal. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, marking time in a home suddenly too quiet since Sarah had left for her trial separation a week ago. Mike slit the envelope open with his letter opener, a retirement gift from his safety engineering team. The bank statement slid out, crisp and official. His eyes, trained by decades of scrutinizing safety reports, immediately caught the discrepancies. Large withdrawals to something called Holt Collection. His name co-signed on authorizations he'd never seen. "I never signed this," he whispered, voice cracking in the empty room. He glanced up at their wedding photo on the wall, Sarah's smile now seeming rehearsed beneath the glass. The memory of their anniversary dinner just 2 months ago flooded back. Her distracted responses, the way she'd checked her phone repeatedly, little signs he'd dismissed. His knees weakened. Mike sank into his leather office chair, the familiar creak offering no comfort now. His hand trembled as he reached for Sarah's laptop, left behind in her haste to create space between them. An email notification glowed on the screen. Without intending to invade her privacy, his eyes caught the preview. "James, confirm tomorrow's meeting about our arrangement. Vanessa's approval came through." A sob caught in Mike's throat, surprising him with its intensity. Not her. Not after 30 years. His gaze drifted to Sarah's hastily vacated desk drawer, partially open. Inside lay their shared calendar, the couple's counseling appointment he'd suggested crossed out weeks ago, long before she'd claimed they needed space to think. Mike's fingers traced their anniversary card, her signature now appearing mechanical, practiced. The safety engineer in him recognized the pattern, premeditation, not impulse. The evidence mounted with each breath. On the bookshelf, Elena's graduation photo watched him, his daughter's formal smile revealing the strain in their relationship. His finger traced her face through the glass, another connection that had weakened over years. Had Sarah's influence shaped that too? Mike straightened his back, engineer's precision returning as he gathered the statements, the laptop. Tears burned behind his eyes, but his hand steadied as he created a folder labeled Discrepancies and placed the first document inside. At 63, he'd faced industrial accidents, offshore platform emergencies, and corporate politics, all requiring methodical assessment before reaction. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Mike quickly wiped his eyes, wondering who would visit at this hour. Perhaps Robert, his friend of 40 years? Or was it someone connected to whatever arrangement Sarah had mentioned? He rose from his chair, the folder clutched protectively against his chest. The clock chimed 9 as he moved toward the door, stepping from grief into something that felt unnervingly like investigation. Morning light filtered through the blinds, finding Mike asleep in his office chair. His neck protested with a sharp twinge as he straightened, momentarily disoriented. The night's discoveries, Sarah's suspicious transfers, the mysterious email, the forged signatures, crashed back into his consciousness with renewed force. He reached for his phone out of habit, surprised to find 3 text messages and a missed call. The first text was from Ted, a colleague from the Safety Commission. "Saw Sarah's posts. You okay, Mike?" His stomach clenched. What posts? Coffee. He needed coffee first. In the kitchen, Mike filled the pot with mechanical precision, his engineer's mind seeking routine when emotions threatened to overwhelm. The grounds spilled slightly, disrupting his normally meticulous process. He abandoned the effort halfway through, the half-prepared coffee pot standing as testament to his unraveling routine. The second text was from Jennifer in accounting. "Here if you need to talk." The third simply read, "Call me," from Robert, his friend of 40 years. Mike's thumb hovered over the screen before opening the social media app he rarely used. There they were, multiple photos of Sarah at her gallery, tagged with his name to ensure he'd see them. Beside her stood a man Mike didn't recognize, introduced in the caption as "Brilliant Artist James Cole." The date stamp showed they were taken 3 days ago during what Sarah had called a business dinner. The intimacy in their posture was unmistakable. In the last photo, James's hand rested on Sarah's lower back, her smile more genuine than any Mike had seen in months. "Celebrating new beginnings with James at the gallery's upcoming Holt Collection preview," the caption read. His coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. The gallery, James, Holt Collection. The pieces connected with sickening clarity. The phone began ringing, another colleague, then another text. How many people had seen? Mike silenced the device with trembling fingers, retreating to the bathroom where he splashed cold water on his unshaven face. He avoided his reflection, unwilling to see the humiliation that now felt etched into his features. In the hallway, the framed photo from their 30th anniversary dinner seemed to mock him. Sarah had worn blue that night, claimed she was working late the following week. The same days she now appeared in photos with James. Mike grabbed his car keys, driven by the need to escape the suddenly suffocating house. In the driveway, he sat behind the wheel, engine off, watching tears drop onto his hands. Hands that had once held Sarah's with absolute trust, designed safety systems that protected hundreds of workers, fixed Elena's bicycle when she was young. He caught his reflection in the rearview mirror and quickly looked away. 63 years old, and he felt like a fool. The public display wasn't just betrayal. It was calculated humiliation. The phone buzzed again. Robert. This time, Mike answered. "I saw," he said, before Robert could speak, his voice steadier than he expected. "And there's more you need to know." Mike forced himself through the motions of normality. Shower. A shave. Professional attire despite working from home. The discipline of routine offered structure when everything else crumbled. His conversation with Robert had been brief, his friend sounding hesitant, suggesting they meet later. Mike had agreed, then retreated to what he knew best, systematic analysis. At his desk, he spread financial statements in chronological order, 6 months' worth. The engineer in him took over, creating a methodical review system. He labeled 3 folders: verified transactions, questionable, and unauthorized. The physical organization helped steady his hands, which had shaken throughout his morning routine. his reading glasses perched low on his nose as he examined each statement line by line. The pattern emerged slowly, then unmistakably. Gallery transactions coinciding with Sarah's business trips. Large withdrawals from their joint account on days James Cole had exhibitions. Hotel charges in their hometown when Sarah claimed to be at conferences in Chicago. 30 years, he whispered to the empty room. 30 years, and I never checked. Mike circled another transaction. $20,000 to the Holt collection with his electronic signature. He'd never signed it, never seen it. The implication sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. The safety engineer who had protected offshore oil workers from disaster for decades had failed to secure his own financial future. The irony wasn't lost on him. His calculator tallied the suspicious transactions, nearly $145,000 over 6 months. Money they'd earmarked for retirement, for their future, a future that now seemed like a cruel joke. Mike removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. Not just an affair, then, something worse. He thought of calling Elena, but stopped himself. Their relationship had been strained for years, another failure he couldn't deny. Would she even believe him over her mother? His attention returned to the statement containing the Holt collection transfer. The more he examined it, the more the signature bothered him. Close to his, but with subtle differences, only someone with his attention to detail would notice. The deliberate forgery suggested premeditation beyond emotional betrayal. Mike reached for the safety manual he'd authored years ago, the investigation protocols he'd developed for determining root causes of industrial accidents. The approach was systematic: gather evidence, identify patterns, document anomalies, establish timeline, interview witnesses, develop hypothesis, test conclusions. He could do this. It was what he was trained for. Creating a new folder labeled Discrepancies, Mike began organizing the evidence methodically. The apartment he'd viewed last week, before Sarah suggested separation, now seemed like foresight rather than coincidence. He'd need somewhere to think clearly, away from a home filled with memories that now felt tainted. Mike checked his phone. Robert still hadn't responded about their meeting. Another small betrayal that stung unexpectedly. As night fell, Mike made his decision. He would move to the apartment temporarily, continue his investigation with professional detachment. Sarah had calculated her moves carefully. He would do the same. His hand steadied as he dialed the number of Thomas Brennan, a forensic accountant he'd worked with on a corporate fraud case years earlier. If his suspicions were correct, he would need professional assistance to trace the money and document the forgery. "Thomas, it's Mike Spencer. I need your help with a potential fraud situation." His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, formal, controlled, devoid of the pain that had threatened to overwhelm him hours earlier. "It's personal, and I believe it involves art valuation." The grandfather clock chimed in the hallway, marking the end of another day and the beginning of something Mike never imagined at 63, becoming an investigator into his own life's unraveling. The temporary apartment felt sterile, devoid of the personal touches that had filled the home he'd shared with Sarah. Mike arranged his essential belongings with engineer's precision. Clothes hung at measured intervals in the closet, toiletries aligned in the bathroom, laptop positioned centrally on the dining table that now served as his command center. He'd brought only one photograph, Elena at her engineering school graduation, her smile formal, but her eyes showing pride that mirrored his own. It was 11:30 p.m., but Mike showed no signs of fatigue as he researched art gallery financial protocols. His browser tabs multiplied. Art valuation methods, authentication processes, investment fraud patterns. The screen's blue glow highlighted the concentration in his features, the same expression he'd worn investigating platform safety violations. "Most art valuation is subjective," he muttered, making notes in his precise handwriting. "Perfect vehicle for inflation." Thomas Brennan arrived precisely at 9 a.m. the next morning, carrying a leather briefcase that had seen better days. The forensic accountant was older than Mike by several years, his tie outdated, but his mind still razor-sharp. "Divorce cases are messy," Thomas said, after reviewing Mike's organized evidence. "But this," he whistled low through his teeth, "this goes beyond marital assets, Mike. These valuation patterns suggest systematic fraud." Mike nodded, vindication providing little comfort. "The Holt collection appears repeatedly. I've found my forged signature on at least 3 major transactions." Together they created a flowchart connecting Sarah, James Cole, and the mysterious Vanessa Holt through transaction patterns. Thomas's expertise in financial forensics complemented Mike's methodical approach. By afternoon, the dining room wall displayed a timeline that would have impressed any federal investigator, color-coded, cross-referenced, meticulously documented. The gallery was doing legitimate business until about 8 months ago, Thomas noted, tapping a particular node in their chart. Then these pattern changes begin: valuation jumps, new collector appearances, administrative fees to shell companies. 8 months, Mike repeated, around when Sarah began working late regularly. Thomas's expression softened momentarily. "You should consult with an attorney before proceeding further. This level of financial manipulation has legal implications beyond divorce." Mike's phone had remained silent all day. Robert still hadn't responded about meeting. The uncharacteristic silence from his friend of 4 decades created another hollow space in Mike's chest. By evening, Mike had decided to visit Robert's workshop, the place they'd spent countless hours building model oil rigs, discussing engineering challenges, sharing life's complications over beers. The familiar drive felt surreal, as though he were watching someone else navigate the streets of his life. Robert's workshop lights were on. Mike parked and gathered his evidence folder, heart pounding with an anxiety he typically associated with presenting difficult findings to corporate boards. The workshop smelled of sawdust and metal, comforting scents from decades of projects. Robert looked up from his workbench, his expression shifting from welcome to discomfort when he saw Mike's folder. "Mike! Didn't expect to see you tonight." "I've been trying to reach you," Mike said, placing the folder on the workbench. "I need to show you something." Robert's reluctance was palpable as Mike systematically presented the evidence. The forged signatures, transaction patterns, gallery valuation discrepancies, the model oil rigs they'd built together over the years, watched from shelves like silent witnesses to the fracturing friendship. "Look, Mike," Robert finally said, not meeting his eyes. "Sarah explained everything. The gallery's doing well. These investments are legitimate. She said you've been—" He hesitated. "Controlling about the finances. Suspicious. That's why she needed space." The betrayal struck deeper than Mike had anticipated. "You've spoken to her." "She called several of us. She's worried about you creating conspiracy theories." "Did you look at the evidence?" Mike's voice remained steady, his engineer's discipline holding despite the tremor in his chest. "The forged signatures, the transaction patterns. You're seeing conspiracy where there's just an affair," Robert said, finally meeting his gaze. "It happens, Mike. Marriages end. People move on. This isn't about the affair." Mike's voice sharpened. "It's about fraud. Financial deception. Look at the documents, Robert." But Robert had already stepped back, creating physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm opening between them. "I think you should talk to someone professional about your feelings, not financial investigations." Rain had begun falling as Mike left the workshop, the droplets intensifying to match his building emotions. In his car, the evidence folder sat on the passenger seat, rejected, unexamined. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour, much like Mike's attempts to maintain composure. He pulled into the parking lot of their regular diner, a place he and Robert had frequented for years after engineering conferences. Inside, he took their usual booth by the window. The waitress approached with coffee without being asked, her familiar smile tinged with concern. "Just you tonight, Mike?" "Just me," he confirmed, voice steady despite the hollowness expanding in his chest. The coffee sat untouched as Mike stared at the rain-blurred lights outside. In his reflection on the window, he saw not just the betrayal of his wife, but now his oldest friend. The isolation was complete, the precise outcome Sarah had engineered by contacting their social circle first with her version of events. A tear escaped before he could stop it, quickly wiped away with engineer's efficiency. Mike straightened his posture. Years of presenting difficult findings to resistant audiences, providing structure when emotions threatened to overwhelm. He left cash for the untouched coffee and walked to his car, rain soaking through his jacket. The evidence folder remained dry, protected against his chest. Thomas was right. He needed legal counsel now. The friend he'd hoped would stand beside him had chosen sides without examining the evidence. In his car, Mike made a call to an attorney Thomas had recommended, his voice perfectly controlled as he scheduled a consultation for the following morning. The safety engineer, who had faced down corporate executives, government regulators, and potential disasters, would apply the same disciplined approach to his personal crisis. The rain intensified as he drove back to his temporary apartment, the wipers struggling to maintain visibility, much like Mike himself, fighting to see clearly through the storm that had become his life. 3 days into his residence at the temporary apartment, Mike hit a wall in his investigation. The meticulous timeline covered one wall, the evidence folders had multiplied, and Thomas had confirmed his suspicions about the gallery's irregular financial practices. But without access to the gallery's internal records, they couldn't conclusively prove the fraud pattern. The attorney had been clear. They needed more evidence before filing any formal complaints. Mike sat alone at the dining table, staring at the family photo he'd brought from home. In it, Elena stood between him and Sarah at her engineering school graduation, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. The strained relationship with his daughter felt like another failure in a suddenly long list. Had he been so absorbed in his career that he'd missed the signs in his marriage, in his relationship with Elena? The questions circled endlessly as evening shadows lengthened across the apartment. The knock at his door was so unexpected that Mike initially thought he'd imagined it. The second, more insistent knock propelled him to his feet. When he opened the door, the sight momentarily robbed him of words. Elena stood in the hallway, rain-soaked and visibly angry, her professional clothing dripping onto the carpet. Her expression, a mixture of determination and hurt, was so reminiscent of his own that it caught him off guard. "Elena," he finally managed, stepping aside. "Come in. You're soaked." She entered with stiff formality, surveying the apartment with the analytical gaze she'd inherited from him. Her eyes widened slightly at the investigation wall, but narrowed again when she turned to face him. "I saw Mom's posts," she said without preamble. "Then I started getting calls from family friends, asking if you were okay since the separation. What's going on?" Mike gestured toward the couch, but Elena remained standing, water pooling beneath her shoes. The emotional distance between them felt vast, despite the small apartment. "Your mother asked for a separation," he began carefully. "Then I discovered financial irregularities involving the gallery. And as you've seen, she's now publicly involved with someone else." "James Cole," Elena nodded. "The artist she's been talking about for months." "Months?" The timeline adjustment landed like a blow. Elena's expression hardened. "Don't act surprised. You were never interested in her work, never attended her gallery events unless forced, never bothered to know her professional world." The accusation stung with its partial truth. "Elena, there's more to this than an affair. There's financial deception involving the gallery, this James Cole, and someone named Vanessa Holt. My signatures were forged on large transfers." "Mom said you'd do this," Elena cut in, her voice sharp. "Make accusations when you felt threatened. Try to control the narrative." "Control the—" Mike stopped himself, the engineer's discipline keeping his voice measured. "I've documented everything. See for yourself." He gestured toward the investigation wall. "You never cared about what mattered to her," Elena continued as if he hadn't spoken. "And you never cared about what mattered to me either." The accusation struck deeper than she could know. Mike's hand moved in an emphatic gesture of denial, accidentally knocking his evidence folder to the floor. Papers scattered across the hardwood, a chaotic contrast to his methodical organization. Elena automatically knelt to help gather them, her training as an engineer evident in how she quickly sorted the fallen documents. She paused, holding a bank statement with highlighted transactions. "This is your signature," she said, frowning. "No," Mike said quietly. "It's not. Compare it to this one." He handed her a legitimate document. Elena's analytical mind engaged visibly as she compared the signatures. Her frown deepened as she picked up another document, then another. "These are forgeries," she said. "Professional assessment overriding emotional reaction." "Sophisticated ones, but definitely forged." Mike nodded, relief washing through him at this small validation. "There's more." As they reorganized the fallen papers, Elena's gaze fell on a cardboard box partially visible in the closet. "What's that?" "Just some personal items I brought from home," Mike replied, but Elena was already moving toward it, perhaps responding to something in his tone. The box contained mementos he'd kept of Elena over the years: academic awards, engineering competition certificates, and a stack of birthday and holiday cards rubber-banded together. Cards he'd sent her during college and early career years, each marked "Return to Sender" in handwriting he now recognized as Sarah's. Elena's hands trembled as she held the cards. "I never received these." Her voice had lost its accusatory edge, replaced by confusion. "Mom told me you didn't bother sending anything, that you were too busy with work." "I sent something every birthday, every Christmas," Mike said softly. "When they came back, I thought you were rejecting them, rejecting me." Elena slowly sank onto the couch, cards clutched in her hands, water from her rain-soaked clothes darkening the fabric beneath her. "She told me you didn't want to hear from me unless I switched from international development to domestic engineering, where you had connections." Her voice had grown unsteady. "She said you were disappointed in my career choices." Mike's throat tightened as the manipulation's scope became clear. "I've always been proud of you, Elena. Your international work is important, necessary." Silence stretched between them as Elena opened one of the returned cards, reading the message inside, then another. Tears began tracking down her cheeks, mingling with raindrops still clinging to her skin. "She's been lying to both of us," Elena finally said, looking up at Mike with an expression that mirrored his own confusion and hurt. For years. Mike moved cautiously to sit beside her, the distance between them still significant, but no longer feeling insurmountable. There's more you need to see. They spent the next hour reviewing his investigation materials, Elena's engineering mind quickly grasping the patterns he'd identified. As daughter and father systematically examined the evidence together, the barriers between them gradually lowered through their shared analytical approach. "Mom told me the separation was recent," Elena said as they reviewed the timeline. "But according to these records, she's been seeing James for over a year." She looked up, her expression shifting from analytical to pained. "The same time period when she began discouraging me from calling you." The realization hung between them. Sarah had deliberately driven wedges into their family relationships, isolating them from each other, while she constructed her new life. "The gallery finances are the key," Elena said, professional focus returning. "I have contacts in the art world through my development work. People who might help us access records without raising alarms." Mike nodded, hope flickering for the first time in days. The estrangement that had felt like one of his greatest failures was beginning to heal through this shared betrayal and common purpose. As evening deepened into night, father and daughter continued working side by side, their similar methodical approaches creating a bridge across years of misunderstanding. Outside, the rain finally stopped, clearing to reveal stars visible through the apartment window, a metaphorical clarity mirroring their newfound understanding. Has someone's betrayal revealed deeper deceptions in your family? Share your story below. Like if this father-daughter moment touches your heart, follow to see how Mike and Elena build their case together. Morning light transformed the apartment, Elena's organizational influence already evident. Where Mike's investigation had been methodical, their combined approach created something more comprehensive. Color-coded tabs marked financial documents, a revised timeline covered the wall with greater detail, and Elena's laptop displayed gallery records she'd accessed through professional contacts. "The appraisal values don't match market standards," Elena explained, pointing to comparative data she'd gathered overnight. "Look at the progression. Each piece in the coal collection increased by exactly 27% in 3 months with no corresponding exhibitions or critical recognition to justify it." Mike nodded, impressed by his daughter's analytical thinking. She'd inherited more than just his features. Her systematic approach mirrored his own professional methodology. The coffee pot, actually used rather than abandoned halfway, percolated in the background, filling the apartment with an aroma of normalcy that had been absent for days. "The gallery's social media shows a pattern too," Elena continued, scrolling through archived posts. "James Cole wasn't even featured until 8 months ago, then suddenly became their premier artist. Their collaborative work continued through the morning, the natural rhythm of 2 engineering minds working in tandem, creating an unspoken healing between them. Years of estrangement couldn't erase their fundamental similarity, a shared approach to problem-solving that transcended the deliberate separation Sarah had engineered. The knock at the door came just after noon, hesitant, almost apologetic in its softness. Mike opened it to find Robert standing in the hallway, a manila folder clutched too tightly in his hand. His usual confident posture was absent, replaced by a slight stoop that made him appear older than his 65 years. "I need to talk to you," Robert said, voice hoarse, as though he'd been awake all night. His eyes registered surprise at seeing Elena behind Mike. "Both of you, apparently." Mike hesitated only briefly before stepping aside to let his oldest friend enter. The betrayal of their last conversation still stung. but the engineer in him recognized Robert's demeanor as someone bringing new information rather than continuing an argument. Robert stood awkwardly in the center of the room, taking in the expanded investigation wall with a mixture of surprise and what appeared to be shame. "I should have looked at your evidence," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, Mike." He placed the folder on the table between them. "My sister Martha died 3 months ago." The statement seemed disconnected until he continued. "She lost her retirement savings in an art investment scheme. I've been settling her estate, going through her financial records." His voice broke slightly. "When I saw your investigation last night, I couldn't sleep. The patterns, they're identical." Elena moved forward, professional compassion in her gesture as she pulled out a chair for Robert. "Tell us what you found." For the next hour, Robert explained how his sister had been approached by an art investment group promising exceptional returns. The documentation he'd brought showed the same percentage increases, similar administrative fee structures, and identical valuation methods that appeared in Sarah's gallery records. "I didn't see it because I didn't want to," Robert admitted, the self-recrimination evident in his voice. Accepting that Martha had been defrauded meant acknowledging I hadn't protected her. "And then when you showed me the same patterns in Sarah's gallery," he looked directly at Mike, "it was easier to believe you were overreacting than to face that I'd missed the signs twice." The admission hung in the air between them, decades of friendship weathering this latest storm. Mike finally nodded, acceptance rather than absolution. "Your sister's records might be the external validation we need." As they incorporated Robert's documentation into their investigation, a knock at the door interrupted their work again. Elena answered this time, returning with an elegantly dressed woman in her late 50s. "This is Diana Wells," Elena introduced, "a collector I contacted yesterday. She's had concerns about the gallery's valuation practices." Diana's precisely manicured hand extended to Mike. "When Elena explained your situation, I recognized the pattern immediately." Her refined appearance contrasted with the directness of her speech. "I've been collecting art for 20 years, Mr. Spencer. I know inflation when I see it." From her portfolio, Diana produced photographs that sent a chill through the room, images from different gallery openings across the country, each featuring the same striking woman identified as Vanessa Holt, accompanying different artists. "She approached me 6 months ago about investing in the Holt collection," Diana explained, her finger tracing the connections between photos. "Something felt off about the valuation projections. I declined, but began hearing similar stories from other collectors." By mid-afternoon, the apartment had transformed into a war room. 3 generations of engineers, Mike, Robert, and Elena, worked with methodical precision alongside Diana's art world expertise. Their combined knowledge created a comprehensive picture of what appeared to be a sophisticated fraud scheme operating through multiple galleries. Thomas Brennan arrived at 4, bringing financial records he'd obtained through professional channels. His whistle of surprise at the expanded investigation spoke volumes. "You've been busy," he noted, surveying the collaborative work. "This is beyond what I expected." Thomas's contribution completed the picture. Financial analysis revealing the gallery had been struggling before the Holt collection investments began. Sarah's apparent success had masked mounting debt and declining legitimate sales. "She was desperate," Mike said quietly, the realization bringing no satisfaction. The gallery was failing. "Financial pressure explains a lot," Thomas agreed, "but doesn't excuse fraud." He tapped the timeline thoughtfully. "The auction for the Holt collection is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. That's when they'll attempt to cash out the inflated values." The timetable created immediate urgency The team worked into the evening, Elena's organizational skills bringing structure to their collective findings. Robert's engineering precision helped map the financial flows, while Diana's art world contacts provided critical context for the valuation discrepancies. As night fell, Mike found himself standing slightly apart, watching the coordinated effort with a complex mixture of emotions. The betrayal that had left him feeling isolated had inadvertently created this alliance. His daughter returned to his life, his oldest friendship repaired, professionals rallying around truth rather than deception. Elena approached, handing him a fresh cup of coffee, made exactly as he preferred, strong, with just a touch of cream. The small detail, that she remembered this preference after years of separation, unexpectedly tightened his throat. "We have enough for the authorities now," she said, her voice reflecting the same professional satisfaction he'd felt when solving complex safety challenges. "The evidence is compelling." Mike nodded, looking at their collaborative work. "Thank you," he said simply, the words encompassing more than just her help with the investigation. Elena's slight smile acknowledged the deeper meaning. "I'm an engineer," she replied. "We fix problems. It's what we do." The statement, so similar to what Mike had told her when repairing her bicycle decades earlier, created a moment of connection that bridged years of miscommunication. In the background, Robert and Thomas discussed legal strategy while Diana made calls to other collectors, the apartment humming with purposeful activity. The betrayal that had threatened to destroy Mike's sense of self had instead revealed a resilience he hadn't known he possessed, and connections stronger than the deceptions meant to sever them. As he rejoined the team discussion, his engineer's mind had already shifted from documenting the problem to implementing the solution, exactly the approach that had defined his successful career and would now help him reclaim his personal life. The auction was 3 weeks away. Their plan was taking shape, and for the first time since discovering Sarah's betrayal, Mike felt something beyond pain and confusion. He felt the certainty of purpose that had always guided his professional life, now extending to his personal crisis. "Let's map out the legal strategy," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had earned respect throughout his career. The team gathered around the table, 3 generations of problem solvers, united by a common goal and the shared values that transcended Sarah's attempts to divide them. The conference room at Thomas Brennan's office projected professional competence, polished mahogany table, leather chairs, discreet lighting that highlighted the evidence folders arranged with mathematical precision. Mike stood at the head of the table, his posture reflecting the confidence he'd carried through decades of safety presentations to corporate boards. "The pattern is clear," he explained to the assembled team of art fraud investigators and legal counsel. Gallery valuations artificially inflated by exactly 27% quarterly. Administrative fees channeled through shell companies. Forged signatures on investment authorizations. Multiple galleries following identical patterns, all connected to Vanessa Holt. He moved with measured authority between the evidence displays, his engineer's precision evident in every gesture. The lead investigator, a woman with 20 years of experience in art fraud, nodded with growing conviction as Mike systematically connected the documentation. "The upcoming auction is the culmination," Mike continued, indicating the timeline on the digital display. "All inflated pieces will be sold to create the appearance of legitimate market value, allowing the principals to cash out before values inevitably collapse." Elena sat near the center of the table, occasionally adding critical context about gallery operations and art market standards. Robert provided supporting analysis of the financial flows, his engineering background bringing clarity to complex transaction patterns. Together, They presented a comprehensive case that left little room for doubt. "This is exceptional work, Mr. Spencer," the lead investigator acknowledged. "Most fraud victims struggle to organize evidence this effectively." Mike nodded, accepting the professional validation without visible emotion, though Elena noticed his hand briefly tighten on the presentation remote, the only sign of the personal toll behind the professional facade. The strategic planning session that followed determined their approach to the gallery confrontation. The legal team outlined jurisdictional considerations, while the fraud unit detailed evidence preservation protocols. Throughout the discussion, Mike contributed with the calm authority that had characterized his safety engineering career, identifying contingencies, prioritizing risks, outlining mitigation strategies. "The preview event for the Holt collection occurs tomorrow evening," the lead investigator noted. "We'll have plainclothes officers in position, but timing is critical. Documentation must be secured before it can be destroyed." Mike arranged the evidence chronologically, his hands steady despite the emotional stakes underlying each document. The forensic accountant's report, Elena's market analysis, Robert's sister's records, Diana's photographic evidence, his own forged signatures, each piece fitting precisely into the case they had built together. As the meeting concluded, an urgent call came through to the lead investigator. Her expression shifted as she listened, then addressed the room. "We've received information that gallery staff have been instructed to clean files tonight. Our timeline just accelerated." The team dispersed with professional efficiency, preparations that had been scheduled for the next day now compressed into hours. Mike remained briefly to finalize details with the legal counsel, his methodical approach unaffected by the increased urgency. In the parking lot afterward, Mike faced one of the most difficult tasks of the ordeal, calling Sarah's parents. Their relationship had always been cordial, built on mutual respect rather than emotional closeness. The conversation was brief, his engineer's precision finding the words to warn them of impending public revelations without unnecessary detail. "Legal action is being taken regarding the gallery tomorrow," he explained, his voice softening only slightly. "I wanted you to hear it from me first." The silence that followed, then their quiet acknowledgement, carried the weight of 30 years of family connection now irrevocably altered. Mike ended the call with the same dignity that had characterized his response throughout the crisis, direct, honest, but never vengeful. Elena waited by his car, her presence a support he wouldn't have imagined possible 2 weeks earlier. The estrangement that had felt like one of his greatest failures had transformed into an unexpected alliance, their shared analytical approach creating a bridge across years of misunderstanding. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" she asked as they stood in the parking lot, city lights reflecting on the wet pavement from an earlier shower. Mike considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. "Professionally, yes. The evidence is irrefutable." He paused, allowing a rare glimpse beneath the composed exterior. "Personally, I'm not sure anyone is ever ready to publicly confront this kind of betrayal." Elena's hand briefly touched his arm, a gesture small in execution but monumental in meaning after years of distance. "You won't be alone." The simple statement carried more reassurance than elaborate promises could have offered. The car windows fogged slightly as they sat discussing final preparations. The enclosed space creating an intimate setting for this connection neither had anticipated when the crisis began. "I always respected your work," Mike said suddenly, the statement seemingly disconnected from their planning discussion. "Your international development projects. I kept every article, every mention of your engineering innovations for water purification systems." The admission hung in the car's quiet interior, a father's pride finally expressed directly after years of Sarah's deliberate interference. "I know that now," Elena replied, the folders of saved clippings from his apartment providing tangible evidence of his support. "We've lost a lot of years." "Not lost," Mike corrected with engineer's precision. "Misdirected. We're finding the proper path now." The distinction was characteristic of his approach to life: pragmatic, solution-focused, unwilling to dwell on what couldn't be changed when a path forward existed. It was this quality that had guided his professional success and was now steering his personal recovery. As they parted ways to prepare for tomorrow's confrontation, Mike found himself standing momentarily alone in the parking lot, watching Elena drive away. The emptiness that had threatened to consume him when he first discovered Sarah's betrayal had been gradually filled by these reconstructed connections: his daughter, his friend, his professional identity. Tomorrow would bring public exposure of private pain, but also vindication of the methodical approach that defined him. He straightened his shoulders, the motion unconscious but telling, the physical embodiment of the dignity he'd maintained throughout the ordeal. The evening light caught the first hints of silver in his hair as he turned toward his car, a man who had faced the collapse of what he thought was certain and discovered a resilience he hadn't known he possessed. Has your expertise ever helped you overcome betrayal? Comment your wisdom win, like for strength in adversity, follow for the confrontation that changes everything. The gallery glowed with calculated elegance, track lighting highlighting artwork at precise angles, champagne flutes reflecting crystal brilliance, white walls creating the illusion of limitless space. Sarah stood near the center of the room in a designer dress that Mike recognized as new, her animated conversation with potential investors projecting confident expertise. Mike paused momentarily at the entrance, taking in the scene with engineer's assessment. James Cole hovered near a large abstract canvas prominently labeled as the centerpiece of the Holt collection, his practiced bohemian appearance now registering as carefully constructed artifice. In the corner, a striking woman Mike immediately identified as Vanessa Holt conducted a hushed conversation with gallery staff. Elena and Robert flanked Mike as they entered, their synchronized movements reflecting weeks of coordinated planning. Diana Wells had arrived earlier, positioned strategically near several key collectors she knew personally. The momentary hush that greeted their entrance rippled through the gathering. Sarah's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips, liquid trembling slightly as her hand registered shock before her face could compose itself. Mike moved with deliberate calm toward the central display pedestal, his posture reflecting the same professional authority he'd carried through decades of safety presentations. The gallery's glass walls created natural amphitheater acoustics, ensuring his measured voice would carry without being raised. "Good evening," he addressed the assembled guests, his tone courteous but firm. "Before you consider investing in tonight's featured collection, there's information you should review." He placed the evidence folder on the pedestal with careful precision, the motion drawing all eyes. James took an instinctive step backward, creating visible distance between himself and Sarah. Vanessa's conversation ceased mid-sentence, her composure the first to visibly fracture as she glanced toward the exit. "The Holt collection valuations represent a systematic pattern of fraud," Mike continued, his methodical presentation transforming the gallery opening into an impromptu seminar on financial deception. He outlined the evidence with engineering precision: inflation percentages, forged authorizations, shell company structures, his voice steady until reaching the personal impact. "My signatures were forged on documents authorizing transfers of over $200,000, he stated, the slight catch in his voice quickly mastered. Elena's supportive nod provided the stability needed to continue. The stunned silence that followed broke when Diana stepped forward, adding her credibility as a respected collector. I verified the pattern across multiple galleries. Several of us declined investment precisely because the valuation models violated standard market principles. Sarah's public facade began visibly crumbling, her practiced smile faltering as her gaze darted between investors, whose expressions shifted from interest to concern to suspicion. James had retreated further, his body language already telegraphing abandonment. As if choreographed, the gallery doors opened to admit the art fraud investigators, their badges creating immediate authority despite their business attire. The lead investigator approached with professional calm, her credentials ending any pretense that this was merely a domestic dispute playing out in public. "Mrs. Spencer, we need to secure the gallery's financial records and artwork provenance documentation," she stated, additional officers moving efficiently toward the office area. "We have a warrant based on evidence of securities fraud and financial misrepresentation." Vanessa's attempt to exit through a side door was intercepted by a plainclothes officer who had been posing as a server. Her composed demeanor dissolved entirely, panic replacing sophistication as she realized the scheme's exposure extended beyond this single gallery. Throughout the controlled chaos that followed, Mike maintained his position near the center of the room, his posture straight but not rigid, his expression reflecting the vindication of methodical truth-seeking rather than personal triumph. The engineering approach that had defined his professional life, identifying problems, gathering evidence, implementing solutions, had proven equally effective in his personal crisis. Collectors gathered around Diana and Elena, who provided additional context about legitimate valuation methods and how to verify whether their previous purchases might be affected. Robert engaged with several investors who recognized similar patterns in other gallery experiences, his sister's documentation providing critical comparative evidence. Sarah finally approached Mike, her voice lowered in an attempt to create privacy in the increasingly crowded space. "You didn't have to do this publicly," she hissed, humiliation replacing her earlier shock. "The fraud was public," Mike replied simply. "The correction needed to be equally visible." The exchange captured their fundamental difference, her concern for appearances versus his focus on accurate representation, a disparity that had likely existed throughout their marriage, but only now became starkly apparent. James had already begun distancing himself from Sarah in conversations with investigators, his self-preservation instincts apparently stronger than any loyalty to their relationship. The betrayal Sarah had orchestrated was now being mirrored back to her as the fraud scheme unraveled publicly. As official proceedings continued around them, Mike stepped slightly away from the center of activity, finding a moment of quiet near the gallery windows. Through the glass, he could see normal evening life continuing on the street, people walking dogs, couples holding hands, everyday routines unaffected by the dissolution of what had once seemed his certain future. A tear of relief briefly threatened before he composed himself, the emotion not of vindictive satisfaction, but of burden lifted. Elena appeared beside him, her presence a silent support that required no words. Together, they watched the reflections in the glass, the gallery behind them with its artificial values being systematically dismantled, and the authentic world outside continuing its natural rhythms. "You did this right," Elena said finally. "Methodical, thorough, evidence-based." The validation carried special weight coming from his daughter, whose engineering mindset matched his own. The professional approach that Sarah had often dismissed as emotional distance had proven to be his greatest strength when facing betrayal. As they turned back toward the proceedings, the lead investigator approached with professional respect. "Mr. Spencer, your documentation has been invaluable. We've already identified connections to 3 other galleries operating similar schemes." The information confirmed Diana's suspicion that Vanessa's network extended beyond this single operation. What had begun as a personal investigation into marital betrayal had expanded to protect numerous other potential victims, an outcome that aligned perfectly with Mike's lifelong commitment to safety and risk prevention. Officers began posting official notices on the gallery's glass doors, the legal language stark against the elegant space. Sarah was engaged in intense conversation with her attorney, the reality of potential charges clearly registering as her posture deflated. James had been separated for questioning, his artistic confidence replaced by visible anxiety. The evening concluded not with the champagne celebration Sarah had planned, but with methodical evidence collection and witness statements. Throughout it all, Mike, Elena, and Robert maintained the dignified composure that reflected their shared values: truth over appearance, substance over style, integrity over expediency. As they finally exited the gallery, several collectors approached to express both sympathy for Mike's personal situation and gratitude for preventing their financial victimization. The respect in their interactions affirmed what Mike had sometimes questioned during his darkest moments: that his methodical approach to life, while perhaps appearing emotionally distant to some, represented values worth maintaining. Outside in the evening air, with official proceedings continuing behind them, Mike allowed himself a moment of quiet acknowledgement. The betrayal that had threatened to destroy his sense of self had instead revealed strengths he hadn't fully recognized and connections more resilient than he'd understood. The vindication wasn't merely legal or financial, but a validation of the careful, methodical approach that defined him, both professionally and personally. The attorney's office projected understated professionalism, muted colors, discreet lighting, comfortable but not ostentatious furniture. Mike sat at the polished conference table, the final divorce papers arranged before him with the same precise alignment he'd applied to engineering specifications throughout his career. His hand moved with steady confidence as he signed each designated line, the fountain pen flowing smoothly across the legal documents. The wedding ring had been removed weeks earlier, leaving a faint pale band that was gradually fading. With each signature, the 30 years of shared life with Sarah were formally dismantled, the legal separation reflecting the emotional reality that had existed for months. "That completes the process, Mr. Spencer," the attorney said, gathering the signed papers with practiced efficiency. "The financial settlement reflects the fraud restitution requirements, and your personal assets have been secured." Mike nodded, the proceedings remarkably straightforward after Sarah's legal position collapsed following the gallery investigation. The criminal charges related to fraud had made her claims in the divorce untenable, her attorney ultimately advising acceptance of terms that prioritized restitution to defrauded investors. In the reception area, Elena and Robert waited, their presence representing the reconstructed connections that had emerged from the crisis. As Mike joined them, no words were needed. The slight relaxation in his shoulders communicated the completion more effectively than declarations could have. Outside, spring sunshine cast a warm glow across the city streets. The newspaper stand near the office displayed headlines about the expanding art fraud investigation. Sarah and James's names now secondary to Vanessa Holt's as authorities uncovered the scheme's full scope. Mike glanced at the headlines but didn't purchase a copy. The public validation had served its purpose. Dwelling on it offered no further benefit. "I thought we might walk to Lakeview Park," Elena suggested, the location significant in their family history. "It's not far." The path to the park took them through familiar neighborhoods, past landmarks that held decades of memories. Yet Mike observed them with new perspective, not erasing the past, but integrating it into a revised understanding of his life. The engineer's mind, that had sometimes been characterized as detached, was actually capable of profound reassessment when presented with new evidence. At the park, they found a bench facing the water, 3 generations seated side by side in comfortable silence. Distant children played near the shore, their excited voices carrying across the water. An elderly couple walked hand in hand along the path, their synchronized movements speaking of decades of shared movement, life continuing in its natural cycles despite individual disruptions. "I've been thinking about what comes next," Mike said finally, his gaze on the rippling water reflecting golden afternoon light. "The safety consulting offers from my former colleagues are generous, but not quite right," Elena finished, the understanding between them growing more intuitive with each passing week. Mike nodded. "Safety engineering has always been about preventing harm, identifying risks before they become disasters. The principles apply beyond industrial settings." Robert leaned forward slightly, his engineer's mind immediately following Mike's logical progression. "You're thinking of applying the methodology to financial fraud prevention. The patterns we identified in the gallery scheme aren't unique to art valuation," Mike confirmed. "The same systematic approach could help identify other investment frauds, particularly those targeting retirement accounts." Elena reached into her bag, withdrawing a small case that she placed on the bench between them. Inside, nestled against velvet lining, lay business cards printed on heavy cream stock. The embossed text caught the afternoon light. "Spencer Safety Consultants. Financial Fraud Prevention. Risk Assessment. Michael Spencer, Elena Spencer, Principal Engineers." "I took the liberty of getting these printed," Elena said, a hint of uncertainty in her voice despite the confidence of the gesture. "The international development projects will continue, but I can base operations here for the domestic consulting work." Mike lifted one card, examining it with the attention to detail that characterized his approach to everything. The weight of the moment, his professional legacy continuing through his daughter, their relationship rebuilding through shared purpose, registered not in dramatic declaration, but in the slight sheen that briefly appeared in his eyes before he blinked it away. "The font choice is excellent," he said finally. "Engineer's precision, focusing on specifics when emotions threaten to overwhelm. Very readable." Elena's smile acknowledged both his spoken approval and the deeper acceptance it represented. Robert chuckled softly, recognizing the typical Spencer approach to emotional moments, technical assessment, masking profound feeling. "I've already mentioned it to Thomas," Elena continued. "He has 3 potential clients who could benefit from our combined expertise. His forensic accounting, your safety systems approach, my international perspective." The conversation shifted to practical considerations, office space requirements, legal structures, marketing approaches, the 3 engineers naturally gravitating toward tangible planning when faced with new possibilities. The bench by the lake became an impromptu conference room, their collaborative problem-solving reflecting shared values that transcended the disruptions of recent months. As afternoon mellowed toward evening, their discussion gradually quieted. The sunset transformed the lake's surface into a canvas of orange and gold, ripples creating constantly shifting patterns in the light. Mike watched the natural spectacle with renewed appreciation, aware that at 63 he was witnessing not just another sunset, but the beginning of an unexpected new chapter. "I'm looking forward to tomorrow," he said simply, the statement encompassing far more than the initial client meeting they had scheduled. The tear that briefly shimmered in his eye as he watched the sunset reflected not grief, but gratitude for professional skills that had provided structure during chaos, for relationships that had proven more resilient than he'd imagined, and for the discovery that even at 63, life could offer meaningful new beginnings. Elena's hand briefly touched his arm, the gesture small but significant after years of distance. Robert's presence completed the circle of connection, friendship tested but ultimately strengthened through crisis. Together, they watched the day's final light transform the ordinary lake into something momentarily extraordinary, a fitting metaphor for how perspective could reshape reality. As they finally rose to leave, Mike took one last look at the water before turning toward the path that would lead them back to the city. The business card rested securely in his wallet, the tangible symbol of continuity and renewal. The betrayal that had threatened to define his later years had instead become merely one chapter in a longer story, a painful passage, certainly, but not the conclusion. With characteristic straightforwardness, Mike began walking forward, his posture reflecting neither the stooped resignation of defeat nor the rigid determination of someone with something to prove. Instead, he moved with the balanced confidence of a man who had faced significant loss and discovered that what remained, his professional integrity, restored relationships, and capacity for renewal, was not merely adequate but valuable in ways he hadn't fully appreciated before. The evening star appeared above the tree line as they followed the path away from the lake, its quiet light marking transition from day to night, from one chapter to the next, from what had been lost to what might yet be discovered. When that envelope sits unopened on your kitchen table, you know, don't you? That moment when instinct whispers something's wrong before your mind can form the thought. We've all been there, friends. That instant when decades of trust suddenly feels fragile as glass. When Mike found those financial discrepancies, his world shattered not just because of money, but because 30 years of shared history was called into question. The clock ticking in an empty house sounds different when you're suddenly alone, doesn't it? Trust breaks in the strangest ways. In the spaces between bank statements and careful signatures. In social media posts that expose private pain to public view. In a friend's hesitation when you need their belief most. At 60-something, we've weathered disappointments before. But betrayal by those closest still cuts deep. Deeper, perhaps, because we know the true value of time invested. The morning coffee grows cold, the newspaper remains folded, and routines that anchored us for decades suddenly feel hollow. But here's what you and I know that younger folks haven't learned yet. Betrayal doesn't have to be the final chapter. Mike's engineering mind gave him structure when emotions threatened to overwhelm. Your lifetime of skills, whatever they may be, those aren't just for your career. They're tools for rebuilding when life collapses around you. That careful attention to detail, that patience developed over decades, that wisdom earned through previous heartaches, these become your foundation when the ground shifts beneath you. Most precious, though, are the connections we thought lost. Mike and Elena found their way back to each other through shared pain, their relationship stronger for having been tested. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal what matters most, not the possessions accumulated over decades, but the bonds that prove resilient even when deliberately damaged. The daughter who returns, the friend who reconsiders, the professional respect that remains untarnished. As evening settles and you sit on your porch watching stars emerge, remember this: your story isn't finished at 60 or 70 or beyond. The light reflecting on water can be just as beautiful at sunset as at dawn. Mike discovered at 63 that endings often contain beginnings, if we have the courage to recognize them. Your hard-earned wisdom, your capacity for resilience, your willingness to rebuild rather than merely survive, these aren't consolation prizes for aging. They're your greatest strengths. The tears you've shed in private have watered something stronger than you knew existed within you. And that, my friends, is worth every difficult step of the journey.